The bobcat was crouched on his front porch, hissing, teeth bared, and when Marcus Cole stepped through the door with his morning coffee, the animal lunged straight at his boots. He kicked sideways on pure reflex, hot coffee splashing across the wooden planks, and the cat scrambled back 3 feet but didn't run. It just sat there, staring at him, breathing fast. What happened in the next 6 weeks would become Appalachian legend, a story whispered about for decades in the hollers of eastern Tennessee, in the VFW halls and the hunting lodges and the churches with gravel parking lots. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Marcus Cole was 44 years old, 6'1", 210 pounds of wire and scar tissue, retired from a unit the government didn't like to talk about. Delta Force, 22 years in. 3 continents of bad memories. He'd moved to a cabin outside Irwin, Tennessee 14 months ago because the nearest neighbor was 1.5 miles down a dirt road, and that was still too close for comfort. He didn't have a dog. He didn't have a cat. He didn't have a phone that worked half the time. That was the point. Marcus Cole came to the mountains to disappear, and for 14 months it had been working. Until this bobcat showed up. Now here's what nobody tells you about bobcats. They're not like house cats. A full-grown bobcat is 30 pounds of coiled violence. They've got retractable claws that can open up a deer's throat. They're ambush predators. They don't walk up to people. They don't sit on porches. They definitely don't follow you. But this one did. Marcus went back inside, grabbed a broom, came out swinging it wide. Not to hurt the thing, just to scare it off. The bobcat bolted into the tree line, vanished into the rhododendron. He figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. 2 hours later, he was splitting firewood behind the cabin, and he heard a sound in the brush. He stopped mid-swing, axe over his shoulder, and turned slow. The bobcat was 10 yards away, crouched behind a fallen hemlock, watching him with those gold-green eyes. Marcus set the axe down and took a step toward it. The cat flinched but held position. He took another step. It backed up, then stopped again. "Go home," he said out loud. His own voice sounded strange to him. He realized he hadn't spoken in 4 days. The bobcat tilted its head, sat down, started grooming its front paw. Marcus picked up the axe and went back to splitting wood. Every time he looked over, the cat was still there. When he finished, he gathered the wood, walked inside and locked the door. Through the kitchen window, he could see the bobcat sitting at the edge of the clearing, motionless. Believe me, Marcus had seen strange things in his life. He'd seen a man in Fallujah walk through a wall of gunfire without getting hit. He'd seen lightning strike the same spot 3 times during an extraction in Colombia. But something about this animal sitting in his yard, refusing to leave, refusing to come closer, put a feeling in his chest he couldn't name. He went to bed that night with his Sig Sauer on the nightstand, same as always. He slept in 2-hour blocks, same as always. At 0300 he woke up to a sound, not a threat sound, not a breaking-in sound. A sound he hadn't heard before, a low, steady crying, almost like a baby. He was at the window in 3 seconds, weapon drawn. The porch light was burned out, but the moon was nearly full and he could see clearly enough. The bobcat was on his porch again, curled against the front door, making that sound, that awful, tiny, broken sound. Marcus lowered the weapon. His jaw tightened. He stepped back from the window and sat on the edge of his bed in the dark for a long time. At first light, he drove his truck into Irwin. He walked into the feed store and found a woman named Patty who'd been working there for 30 years and knew more about wildlife than the game wardens did. "Got a bobcat following me around," he said. No preamble, no small talk. Marcus didn't do small talk. Patty looked him up and down. She'd seen him come in for supplies a handful of times. Never more than 10 words per visit. "Following you how? Sits in my yard, sleeps on my porch. Won't leave." Patty leaned on the counter. "Male or female?" "Small. I'd guess female. Maybe 30 pounds. "She hiss at you?" "First time. Not since. Could be she's habituated. Somebody might have been feeding her." "You feeding her?" "No. She look healthy?" Marcus paused. He hadn't thought about it. He'd been so focused on the behavior that he hadn't really looked at the animal itself. Thin, maybe. I'll check. He put 2 chicken thighs on a plate and set it at the far end of the porch. Then he went inside, sat by the window with a pair of binoculars, and waited. The bobcat appeared within 20 minutes. She approached the plate low and cautious, sniffed it, then ate. Not fast, not desperate, deliberate. When she finished, she sat back and looked directly at the window where Marcus was sitting. He pulled back from the glass. His heart was doing something he didn't authorize. Through the binoculars, he'd noticed 3 things. 1, she was thin. Not starving, but too lean. 2, she had a mark on her right ear. A notch, clean cut. Could have been a fight. Could have been something else. 3, and this was the thing that kept him up that night. She had a raw, angry stripe around her neck, where the fur was worn down to pink skin. A collar mark. Someone had kept this bobcat. Someone had put a collar on a wild animal, and now that collar was gone, but the damage remained. Marcus sat on his porch the next morning and waited. The bobcat came out of the trees at 7:15, walked halfway across the clearing and sat. They looked at each other across 40 feet of mountain grass. "All right," Marcus said. "Let's figure this out." He started asking around. Not in town. Marcus didn't trust town. He drove up to the ranger station on the edge of the Cherokee National Forest and talked to a wildlife officer named Danny Rains. Young guy, maybe 30, with a serious face and a truck full of radio equipment. "Somebody's been keeping a bobcat up here," Danny said, already shaking his head. "That's illegal. Class a misdemeanor. You got a location on who might have had her?" "If I had a location, I wouldn't be here." Danny pulled up records on his laptop. 2 complaints in the last year about exotic animal activity in Unicoi County. One was a guy with a python, already handled. The other was a tip about someone keeping wild cats in enclosures off Route 107, never confirmed, never followed up. Marcus took the address. "I swear this happened." The address led to a property 9 miles from Marcus's cabin. A run-down compound at the end of a gravel road that dead-ended against a ridge. Chain-link fencing, 2 outbuildings, a single-wide trailer with a Confederate flag in the window and a satellite dish on the roof. 3 vehicles in the yard, 2 of them on blocks. Marcus drove past slow, didn't stop. He parked a quarter-mile down the road and walked back through the woods. Old habits don't die. They don't even sleep. He approached from the uphill side, moving through the trees the way he'd moved through 1,000 tree lines in a dozen countries, weight on the balls of his feet, breathing through his nose, stopping every 10 steps to listen. The compound was quiet. 1 truck in the driveway still had plates on it. He pulled out his phone and took pictures of everything. Then he heard them. Cats, not house cats. Something bigger, multiple voices coming from the larger outbuilding. A chorus of distressed animal sounds that made the hair on his arms stand up. Marcus moved closer. The outbuilding had a padlocked door and no windows on the side facing him. He circled to the back and found a vent near the roofline. He pulled himself up on the cinder block foundation, got his eyes level with the vent and looked inside. What he saw made his hands grip the concrete so hard his knuckles turned white. Cages, 8 of them, stacked 2 high. Inside the cages were bobcats, young ones, old ones, one that might have been a hybrid of some kind. The cages were too small. The floor of each one was wire mesh with a collection pan underneath that hadn't been emptied in what looked like weeks. Water bowls were dry. The smell hit him through the vent, and he turned his head and breathed. Now listen to me. Marcus Cole had seen mass graves. He'd seen what human beings do to other human beings when nobody's watching. He thought he was past the point of being shocked by cruelty. He was wrong. He dropped down from the wall and stood with his back against the building, and his breathing changed. Not panic. Something colder than panic. Something he recognized from before operations. The focused calm that comes when you've identified a target and the only question left is method. He pulled out his phone and called Danny Rains. "I found them," he said. "Bring everyone." But here's where it gets complicated. Danny told him it would take time, warrants, jurisdictional clearance. The Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency would need to be involved. A judge would need to sign off. Could be a day. Could be 3 days. Marcus hung up. He looked at the outbuilding. He listened to the sounds coming from inside it. Then he got in his truck and drove home. The Bobcat was waiting on his porch. He sat down on the top step, 3 feet from her. Closest he'd ever been. She didn't flinch. He could see the collar wound clearly now. It was healing, but slowly. The fur might never grow back fully. "I found where you came from," he said. The Bobcat blinked at him. Slow, deliberate. "I'm gonna fix it." He went inside and made 2 calls. The first was to a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, a veterinarian in Johnson City who specialized in wildlife rehabilitation. He'd found her number online at the library in town 3 weeks ago, back when the Bobcat first showed up, and he'd written it on a scrap of paper and stuck it to his refrigerator without knowing why. Now he knew why. "I've got an injured Bobcat that's been kept in captivity," he said. "Collar wound, underweight, possibly habituated to humans. And there are more. At least 7 more in cages at a property off 107. Sarah Chen asked him questions. He answered them. She said she'd be ready when the time came. She said she'd bring a team. The second call was to a man named Garza. That's all I'll say about Garza. Marcus hadn't talked to him in 9 months. When Garza picked up, Marcus could hear wind, which meant Garza was somewhere high up, which meant Garza was still working. "I need information on a property owner," Marcus said, and gave him the address. 20 minutes later, Garza called back with a name. Tully Breckenridge, 41 years old, 2 prior arrests for animal cruelty, both pled down to misdemeanors. 1 arrest for assault, charges dropped. Known to local law enforcement as a trader in exotic and wild-caught animals. Sold them online. Sold them at swap meets. Sold them to private collectors. Marcus set the phone down on the kitchen table. He looked at his hands. Steady. They were always steady. He looked out the window at the Bobcat on his porch. She'd escaped. Or been released. Or been thrown out because she wasn't profitable. And she'd walked 9 miles through the mountains and found the one person within 50 miles who understood what it meant to survive a cage. Trust me when I tell you what happened next. Because it sounds like something out of a movie. But this is Eastern Tennessee and things happen different out here. Marcus couldn't wait 3 days. Not with those animals in those cages. Not with empty water bowls and overflowing waste pans. 3 days and some of them would be dead. So he went back. He went at 0200, dressed in dark clothing, moving through the woods with no flashlight. The moon was behind clouds this time, and the darkness was total under the canopy, but Marcus had operated in darker conditions than this. He had a pair of bolt cutters, a headlamp he'd keep off until he needed it, and a Leatherman multi-tool. He also had his SIG, force of habit. He told himself he wouldn't need it. The compound was dark. The truck with plates was gone. No lights in the trailer. He waited 30 minutes at the tree line, watching, listening, cataloging every sound. Crickets. A barred owl somewhere on the ridge. The faint hum of a generator. Nothing human. He moved. The padlock on the outbuilding was a master lock, standard shackle. The bolt cutters went through it with a single squeeze. He opened the door, stepped inside, and turned on the headlamp. The smell hit him first. Ammonia and decay, and something sweet and wrong underneath it. The cats went silent when the light came on, all of them pressing to the backs of their cages, eyes reflecting green and gold. His jaw flexed. He kept working. He took photos. Every cage, every animal. The dead one. The conditions, the dates on the food bags, the collar-making supplies on a workbench in the corner, leather straps and rivets and a hand punch. This was his evidence package. This was what would make the warrant unnecessary, because once he put these photos in front of a judge, there wouldn't be a delay. He was photographing the last cage when headlights swept across the wall. Marcus killed his headlamp and moved to the door. Through the crack, he saw the truck pulling into the yard. The truck with plates. Driver's side door opened and a man got out. Big. 6'3", maybe 260. Tully Breckenridge walked toward the trailer, then stopped. He'd seen the padlock. Or rather, he'd seen the absence of the padlock. Tully reached into the truck bed and came out with a tire iron. Marcus stepped out of the outbuilding. They faced each other across 20 feet of dirt yard, and for a moment neither of them moved. Marcus had his hands at his sides. The cig was on his hip, but his hands were at his sides. "Who the hell are you?" Tully said. The guy who just called the police. He hadn't. Not yet. But Tully didn't know that. Now pay attention to this part. Tully Breckinridge had 60 pounds on Marcus and a tire iron, and the confidence of a man who'd never met real danger in his life. He'd bullied animals. He'd bullied people smaller than him. He'd built his entire world on the principle that if you're bigger and meaner and louder, you win. He took a step toward Marcus. "You're on my property. I got every right to put you in the ground." Marcus didn't move, didn't blink. 22 years of training lived in his posture, in the placement of his feet, in the angle of his shoulders. You got 8 animals in cages in there. One of them's dead. You want to add a felony assault charge to the animal cruelty charges? Go ahead. Swing. Tully's eyes went to Marcus's hip. He saw the weapon. His grip shifted on the tire iron. Here's the thing about bullies. They calculate. Every single time. They're not brave. They're accountants of violence, always measuring whether they can afford the cost. Tully lowered the tire iron half an inch. "Get off my land." No. That single word landed in the dark yard and everything changed. Marcus took one step forward. Just one. Tully took one step back. And in that exchange, the power dynamic shifted permanently. Marcus pulled out his phone, keeping his eyes on Tully, and dialed Danny Rains. It rang 4 times. "Danny." "Marcus Cole. I'm at the property off 107. The owner's here. The animals are in distress. One's dead. I need officers here now." Danny started asking questions, but Marcus had already hung up. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at Tully. "You can wait here for them, or you can run. I don't care which." Tully's lip curled. "You don't know who I am around here." "I know exactly what you are." Tully stared at him for a long 5 seconds. Then he got in his truck, fired the engine, and tore out of the yard, gravel spraying, taillights disappearing down the road. Marcus let out a breath. He walked back into the outbuilding and sat on an overturned bucket among the cages. The cats were watching him, 7 pairs of eyes in the dim light from the open door. He could hear their breathing, quick, scared. "Hang on," he said quietly. "Help's coming." And here's the part that breaks the story open. Marcus stood at the edge of the property and watched. He didn't help. He didn't need to. He'd done his part. Danny walked over to him while the veterinary team worked. "We got Breckinridge." Pulled him over on Route 23 heading toward the state line. "He's in custody." Marcus nodded. "You know you committed breaking and entering tonight." "I know." Danny looked at the outbuilding, looked at the vet team, looked at Marcus. Marcus almost smiled. Almost. But here's what was waiting for him when he got home. Marcus stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He couldn't move. And she'd chosen his porch. This is the part they talk about in Irwin. This is the part that became the legend, because he understood. She hadn't found him by accident. She'd found him because damaged things recognize each other. Because survival has a frequency, and if you're tuned to it, you can hear it from 9 miles away. The kitten mewed. The mother licked its head. Marcus wiped his face with the back of his hand and took a breath that filled his whole chest. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He called Dr. Sarah Chen that afternoon. She drove out to the cabin and examined both cats on the porch while Marcus held a towel ready in case the mother bolted. She didn't bolt. She let the vet work, watching Marcus the whole time with those gold-green eyes. "She's healthy enough," Sarah said. "Malnourished but recovering. The kitten's strong, good weight for 4 weeks. Can they stay wild? The mother's habituated. She might never fully rewild, but the kitten has a chance if it grows up with enough space and enough distance from humans." Marcus looked at his property. 60 acres of hardwood forest backed up against 1,000 acres of national forest. Space wasn't a problem. What about her neck? "It'll heal. Might scar. But it'll heal." Sarah looked at him. She was a small woman with steady hands and kind eyes, and she'd been doing wildlife rehab for 15 years. She'd seen a lot of broken animals. She'd seen a lot of broken people who found broken animals. "Marcus," she said, and her voice was different now, gentle in a way that made him uncomfortable. "Are you okay?" His hands were on his knees. He looked at them. "Steady as ever." "Getting there," he said. "And let me tell you something." The bobcat just listened. She'd sit there with her paws tucked under her chest and her ears forward, and she'd watch him talk. And when he stopped, she'd blink slow and yawn and groom her shoulder, and it was the most therapeutic response Marcus Cole had ever received. Word got around. It always does in small towns. Danny Raines told somebody. Sarah Chen mentioned it to a colleague. The story of the Delta Force veteran and the bobcat that found him spread through Unicoi County in the way that stories move through mountains, slowly but permanently. People started showing up. Not many. Marcus wouldn't have allowed many. But a few. A reporter from the Johnson City Press. A woman from an animal rescue organization in Knoxville. A retired army chaplain who'd heard the story third hand and drove 2 hours to shake Marcus's hand. Marcus didn't like the attention, but he endured it because the attention brought resources. The animal rescue organization funded the rehabilitation of the 7 surviving bobcats from Tully's compound. 4 of them were eventually released into the wild. 3, too habituated to survive alone, went to licensed wildlife sanctuaries. Tully Breckenridge pled guilty to 8 counts of animal cruelty and 1 count of illegal possession of wildlife. The judge, who happened to own 2 dogs and a cat, gave him the maximum, 18 months. Not enough, in Marcus's opinion, but enough to shut down the operation permanently. And the bobcat stayed. She stayed through the summer. She stayed through the fall, when the mountains turned red and gold and the air thinned and sharpened. She taught her kitten to hunt, and Marcus would watch from his porch as the 2 of them stalked chipmunks in the yard with varying degrees of success. By winter, the kitten wasn't a kitten anymore. It was a young bobcat, lean and quick, and increasingly independent. It started disappearing for longer stretches, returning with the smell of deep woods on its fur. You already know how this part goes. One morning in January, Marcus woke up and the young bobcat was gone. Not on the porch, not in the lean-to, not in the yard. He waited a day, 2 days, a week. It didn't come back. It had done exactly what Sarah Chen said it might do. It had grown up with enough space and enough distance, and it had gone wild. If you're hearing this story and it means something to you, hit that subscribe button right now. Because stories about the things that save us deserve to be told, and you being here means they keep getting told. The mother stayed another month. Marcus noticed her patterns changing. She was spending more time in the woods, more time hunting, less time on the porch. The collar wound had closed completely, leaving a thin line of pale fur around her neck. She was at a healthy weight. Her coat was thick and glossy for winter. On a Tuesday morning in February, Marcus came out with his coffee and she was sitting at the far edge of the clearing. Not on the porch, not in the lean-to, at the tree line. She looked at him across that distance, the same distance she'd kept when she first appeared, and something passed between them that Marcus would never be able to describe. He set his coffee down. He walked to the edge of the porch. She held his gaze for 10 long seconds. Then she turned and walked into the rhododendron and the mountain laurel and the deep green shadows of the forest, and she didn't look back. Marcus stood on his porch for a long time after she disappeared. The yard was empty. The lean-to was empty. The mountain was quiet in the way that only February mountains are quiet, when the snow absorbs every sound and the world feels held in a closed fist. He went inside. He sat at his kitchen table. He picked up his phone and called a number he hadn't dialed in 3 years. His sister answered on the second ring. "Annie," he said. "It's Marcus." There was silence on the other end. Then a sound that might have been crying, or might have been laughing, or might have been both. "Marcus." "Oh my God." "Marcus." "I'm okay," he said. "I'm calling because I should have called a long time ago. And I'm sorry." They talked for 2 hours. He told her about the cabin. He told her about the mountains. He told her about the bobcat. She told him about his niece, who was 7 now and had his eyes. She told him about their mother, who was healthy but scared, who lit a candle for him every Sunday at church because she didn't know if he was alive or dead. "Can I come see you?" Annie asked. Marcus looked out the window at the empty clearing, at the lean-to he'd built with his hands, at the porch where a wild animal had trusted him with the only thing that mattered to her. "Yeah," he said. "Come whenever you want." He paused. "Bring Mom." 2 months later, Marcus Cole started volunteering at Sarah Chen's Wildlife Rehabilitation Center in Johnson City. He drove down twice a week, cleaned enclosures, mixed formula for orphaned animals, fixed fencing. He didn't talk much. He worked with his hands, and he was good at it, and the animals didn't flinch when he came near them. Sarah asked him once how he'd learned to move so quietly around frightened animals. He looked at her, and his face did something complicated, something between sadness and understanding. "Same way she did," he said. 5 words. And Sarah Chen, who'd spent 15 years around suffering and recovery, knew exactly what he meant and never asked again. In the spring, a hiker on the Appalachian Trail reported seeing 2 bobcats crossing a ridge above Irwin, an adult female and a younger one, moving together through the mountain laurel. The hiker said the older one had an unusual marking around its neck, a ring of lighter fur. Danny Rains heard the report and mentioned it to Marcus the next time they crossed paths at the gas station in town. Marcus bought his coffee, got in his truck, and sat in the parking lot for a minute. He looked up at the ridgeline, green and sharp against a blue sky. Then he drove home. His sister was coming for the weekend. His mother was coming too. He had to put fresh sheets on the beds. He had to stock the refrigerator. He had to do the ordinary, impossible work of letting people back in. The lean-to was still standing against the side of the cabin. He hadn't taken it down. He wouldn't take it down. Not because he expected her to come back. She wouldn't. He knew that with the certainty of a man who understood what it meant to be released. He left it standing because some shelters aren't for the ones who leave. They're for the ones who stay. And Marcus Cole stayed. In those mountains. In that cabin. In a life he'd finally stopped running from. A bobcat had walked out of the woods and shown him the one thing 22 years of combat never could. That the bravest thing you'll ever do isn't surviving. It's letting something matter to you again. That's the legend they tell in Irwin, Tennessee. About the soldier and the bobcat. About the cages that got broken open, all of them, even the ones nobody could see. They tell it at the VFW and the feed store and the wildlife center and the church with the gravel parking lot, where an old woman lights a candle every Sunday, not out of fear anymore, but out of gratitude. And if you drive up that dirt road, past the 1.5 mile mark, past the mailbox with no name on it, past the gate that's not locked anymore, you'll find a cabin with a lean-to against the side and a porch with 2 chairs instead of 1. And if you're quiet enough and patient enough, and you sit there long enough as the evening comes down over the Appalachian Ridge, you might hear something moving through the laurel. Something wild and healed and free, and you'll know. The way Marcus knew, the way the bobcat knew. Some things find you because you're finally ready to be found.